Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Talk of the Town podcast. If you have not already, make sure to hit that subscribe button, as we're now on the road to 500 subscribers here on the YouTube channel. If you love sports content, sports talk, anything from the NFL to the NBA, it's all right here on the Talk of the Town podcast. And man, is it a bittersweet morning this morning or what? With the NFL regular season wrapping up last night, we have the playoffs rolling around here this week, which I always say, in about 2 weeks, we'll be looking at the AFC and the NFC championship, and it'll be like, shit, dude, we have one game left. It just seems like a week ago, we were looking at Jalen Carter spit on one of the Cowboys players during, I think it was the literal first play of the year, and now all of a sudden we're already in wild card weekend. That's just pretty crazy to me. So, it just goes by too fast. And, of course, with this season, it was a very special NFL season to me, of course, with it being the first season of me having this podcast and all the growth and support I've seen throughout the season. Whether or not, you shit talk in my comments, you watch for 5 minutes, any amount of support just means everything to me. So, again, thank you guys so much throughout this season so far, especially as it's coming to an end, for any amount of support you guys have shown to the channel. Of course, we'll have more NBA content ramping up here, especially as we're kind of getting to the midway point of the NBA season. We have those playoffs kind of rolling around here in a few months, so there'll be a lot more to talk about there. But this will always be an NFL first channel, so always put NFL news out there first, but we'll definitely have more NBA content rolling around as well. So make sure to stay tuned for that, especially if you're into that. And let's get in to the first discussion of today's video, starting here with the Ravens and the Steelers. This kind of seems like the end of the Harbaugh regime last night. That was really the nail in the coffin, and what's kind of been the story of the last, really kind of since the Ravens have won that Super Bowl back in 2012, just choke leads, inconsistency, and just kind of weird hirings. I don't necessarily want to say weird hirings. I think it just goes deeper than Harbaugh, of course. I can't necessarily blame all of last night on him, but you can kind of link everything back to him, to be honest with you. I didn't necessarily think the offense was the major issue last night. They had a major, they really just didn't do anything throughout the last, really the second quarter and the third quarter, and kind of had a surge throughout the last 8 to 10 minutes of the game or so. And I always say with Harbaugh, you can always kind of link it back to him, of course, and he's the head coach. You can always find a way to do so. And Zach Orr's defense, I've been saying all year, is just atrocious. And one reaction I gave to the game last night, and I've mentioned here multiple times on the podcast, I live near Baltimore, and I'm in a household full of Ravens fans. Friends are Ravens fans everywhere I go, and I'm surrounded. And the reaction to that game last night, especially with being near the fan base and all, even though I'm not a fan, it was just incredibly shocking. It was really no words, to be honest with you. You knew it was going to be one of those things you woke up in the morning and it was going to feel really shitty if you're a Ravens fan. But in the moment, you couldn't quite just soak it in, and it's just you're like, damn, we can really be playing next Monday. But Tyler Lute missed a kick. Our defense choked in the last couple of minutes of the game. It's a fireable offense, just knowing the Steelers had no timeouts. You had the whole Aaron Rodgers and the weird miscommunication and the helmet kind of thing going on. And they had to burn all their timeouts at the beginning of the fourth quarter. Everyone was like, what the hell is going on with Pittsburgh and the timeouts right now? And it felt like one of those things that were really going to come back and kind of bite them in the ass at the end of the game. And it didn't somehow. And another pattern of just the Ravens continuously choking games in the last couple of minutes. And Lamar did all he could. That game was not on Lamar Jackson at all. Clearly, he's been hurt all season. He's been going through pain all season. He hasn't really wanted to play due to it, but you got to do what you got to do when you're getting paid, what, $250 million? Hell, you got a little bit of a back bruise. If you were to give me $250 million to play 18 weeks, I'd go out there with a broken arm. I'd go out there with a lot of broken limbs to go out there and try and play on that football field. I'll just say that. And, he did what he could last night. That kind of last 10-minute surge the Ravens had on offense was pretty incredible to watch. That last play of the game where Lamar shrugged off that defender, I don't think it was the last play of the game, or it was before the last drive of the game, and he threw that touchdown. I believe it was to Zay Flowers down the field, was just vintage Lamar. The Lamar we seen at the beginning of the year, before the hamstring, before the bruised back, just a lot of that stuff. And I just felt like, okay, well, he's clearly still there. It's not like he's completely washed. We've been knowing he's been injured. But it goes back to Harbaugh's hirings and not being able to change his staff, make decisions, and change during the season, what just some people do. And not necessarily saying that it would have worked 100% if they would have canned Zach Orr after week 5, week 6, whenever their bye week was, when they historically had the worst defense in NFL history throughout the first 6 weeks. I don't know if you guys seen the Miami Dolphins defense throughout the first, 8 weeks of the season. It was awful. I mean, for one, the Ravens, who had a worse defense than that Dolphins defense, there was a graphic that was shown, I think it was like a few weeks ago, that I think it was the red zone touchdown percentage for the Ravens throughout the first 6 weeks was 100%. So that means teams that were to get within 20 yards of their own end zone, it was a guaranteed touchdown. If they got to the 20-yard line, they were scoring a touchdown every time throughout the first 6 weeks. How he didn't make a change, and you have guys like Chuck Pagano who can easily replace him. And there's guys out there everywhere you can hire. There's former defensive coordinators. You don't necessarily need Bill Belichick or Vic Fangio or Vance Joseph to fill in that position. Those are elite hirings that you're not going to really be able to get, not necessarily Bill Belichick, but guys like Vance Joseph and Vic Fangio that are hired by other teams that the Ravens had a chance to get. And you're too busy just still dicking around with Zach Orr. And what does it show? That the last couple of minutes of the game, Steelers with no timeouts, you know what they're going to do. He does the same thing game in and game out of just that soft defense. And I'm going to tell you something. I don't care whether you're going against Brady Cook on the Jets or especially an old Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers is still Aaron Rodgers. I always say he's not like Drew Brees or Peyton Manning in their last couple of years where their arms were literally falling off their shoulders, yet Peyton Manning still won a Super Bowl and Drew Brees was still competing for a Super Bowl nonetheless. Aaron Rodgers still has a hell of an arm. And it's not like the IQ went anywhere. If you give him time to throw and you play a soft defense, he's going to carve you up. And it's like you got to put pressure on him and you have to get stops. And I watched all of the Ravens games this year, as I always do with usually every game. I watch every game during the year. Their defense is so mis-schemed. Unlike the Houston Texans, when I watch D'Amico Ryans in that defense, and I don't quite think the Ravens defense is as talented as the Texans defense, but they're one of the more talented groups in the NFL. I mean, they can play up there to the standards of Denver and Houston. Yeah, they may not quite be as talented as those teams. I do think they could use another pass rusher, which I think they're going to have to look heavily into the draft, offensive linemen and stuff like that. But there's no reason their defense should be constantly choking games for them. Instead, there's no reason for it. I think their defense is far better than the Chargers defense. I mean, I like the Chargers defense, but I think it's better. And the Chargers defense is playing their ass off. They just have good coordinators. They're so poorly schemed. As I mentioned with D'Amico Ryans to me schemes the best defense in the NFL. Just those guys, he can put out there a bunch of 6th, 7th, 5th round picks and he'd find a way to get them to perform because he plays to their strengths. He's not too busy trying to play, hey, we need to play back. Let's not put pressure on the quarterback. We're just going to play back. We don't want any big plays. And yet it's just constant with the Ravens with choking these leads. And it's been one constant through it all. It's John Harbaugh. And at some point, it's like you really just have to look in the mirror and be like, we need a full reset here. And one of the things that kind of scares me with the Ravens, to be honest with you, is their loyalty to their coaches. Kind of like the Steelers as well. It's like the Steelers have been in the same spot, even though they won last night. I would probably take Houston, or I think I right now I would take Houston to beat them on Monday next week. I would. And I think most of America is. I think Aaron Rodgers is going to get crunched back there. Everyone's saying, oh, well, Aaron Aaron's going to be back next year. He's looking at coming back to Pittsburgh, but I think he's going to take a hell of a beating on Monday. I do. I think D'Amico Ryans is going to go out there, and I think they're going to beat the shit out of Aaron Rodgers, because if you get a good pass rush going, I mean, you see what Cleveland did to them last week. They were too busy, being worried about Myles Garrett and the sack record. But, I mean, he was just getting beat to death. The pressure, just caving him in the pocket, and just, I mean, it was pretty bad. And I think the same thing's going to happen. And that's what I thought. Like, why would the Ravens? You never see a dialed blitz. I didn't see Kyle Hamilton, even though he got hurt. I think it was in the end of the second or early third quarter yesterday. I didn't see him on a blitz one time yesterday. It's one of, I'd say he is the best blitzing safety in the NFL. And that's where I say that Ravens defense is so mis-schemed. And again, that is one of John Harbaugh's hires and a decision he had to have made in week 6, to where I think just about any head coach in the NFL would have canned him. I get it. He's a former player, former All-Pro for the Ravens. But at some point, you have to look at, like, I'm kind of coaching for my job. And not only am I coaching for my job, I'm coaching for Lamar's legacy, Derrick Henry's legacy. I'm coaching for a lot here. A lot is on the line with this season. I mentioned that at the beginning of the season as well, as like, this Ravens season was the most important in franchise history. And I said, if they go and lose in the AFC Championship, that's going to be a major disappointment, and just a major disappointment. And I think it could get pretty toxic in that locker room. We have legacies on the line, guys like DeAndre Hopkins trying to win a ring, Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, who may not be a Hall of Famer, but he will be in the Ring of Honor one day for the Ravens. He'll be remembered as in the Hall of Very Good for tight ends. He was up there with Kittle and Kelsey in their primes. Like, it was kind of 1A, 1B, 1C between those guys. He was competing with those guys in their prime. So he's an all-time great Ravens tight end. A lot of talent there just being completely wasted. Roquan Smith, a lot of legacies on the line. And I was sitting there saying, if they lose in the AFC Championship, it would have been a major disappointment. And I think things would have went south in the organization. I was like, I don't know how you can bring back Harbaugh. I wouldn't have imagined in a million years it wouldn't even have made the playoffs this year. That to me is there is no doubt. I can't even believe it's a conversation right now that is like, well, maybe we keep Harbaugh, we just fire, or you got to let it go. You do. It is inexcusable that you were the Vegas favorites at the beginning of this season, and yet you don't even make the playoffs. You finish under 500. I know Lamar was dealing with injury, but regardless, multiple games, goes back to Buffalo before the injury, Detroit, like just bad losses, choked games. It's just been unusual. It dates back to Billy Cundiff. I don't know if you guys remember that in the AFC Championship years ago against New England. They got I can't remember if it was to win the game or just to go in overtime. I think it was to go in overtime. And he ended up missing the field goal. Kind of like last night with Tyler Loop. Except John Harbaugh had a timeout. All the players, you have Cundiff, you have the special teams rushing out on the field. John Harbaugh had a timeout. I mean, you would have thought with time expiring, the play clock that went down, that this team had no timeout. It was just a mess, and it happened. They had a timeout in their pocket, didn't use it. And yet Billy Cundiff missed a field goal because he's out there running like a gazelle out there trying to just get out there in time, and things are all over the place. It was just a disaster. Like, it dates back to years and years of just mishaps and bad play calling and choked games. And I know it seems like I'm slamming the Ravens here, which I am, but it needs to happen. Like Tyler Loop last night, a lot of people are kind of like, well, he is human. He's this and that. Of course he's human. I'm not going to sit there and send him death threats, I don't think he deserves death threats or anything over missing a kick. But at the same time, if people are like, oh, people shouldn't be bashing him over missing the kick, he had a lot of pressure on him, this and that. It's his job to make those kicks. You have guys like Brandon Aubrey. 60-yard field goals to a lot of these guys anymore, especially the new era of kickers, which he is in, by the way. They just use a 6th-round pick on him this year. They're hitting 55, 60-yard field goals like they're 30-yard field goals. They're chip shots. I get maybe the conditions weren't necessarily perfect last night, but it's January football in Pittsburgh. Even if they were at home in Baltimore, the weather's never going to be perfect for this guy to make a field goal. And it's like a real-world situation, and this is why the fan base gets pissed off. And I agree. Whether or not I'm a Patriots fan, if Borregales missed a field goal, I'd be the same way. Like, it's your job to go out there and make kicks. Whether or not we're a cashier at a grocery store, we cook the burgers at a McDonald's, we're some executive on Wall Street, whatever it is, you got to do your job, or else, guess what we're gonna be? Out on the street looking for another job. That's why people get so pissed at him. It's like, yeah, a lot of people have pressure to pay the bills, and they're working 3 jobs. They can't afford to, whatever it is. There's a lot of pressure on other people as well with dire situations. Make the kick. It's a 44-yard field goal. Sorry, the conditions weren't perfect. I get Chris Boswell missed the extra point before that, which a lot of people, in Tyler Loop's favor, I'm sure as hell he's like, oh, well, thank God Chris Boswell missed that extra point. It sure as hell makes me look better. But nonetheless, you're in the playoffs or you're not with that kick. Now you're not in the playoffs because you miss it. Sorry, the conditions can't be perfect, but I'm not necessarily someone who's like fully sympathetic for Tyler Loop. Shit happens in life. I don't think the guy deserves death threats or anything like that. I don't think anybody does, but, or unless you've done some absolutely like horrible, what I'm saying? Like, you guys know what I mean by horrible, but, over missing a kick, I don't think anyone deserves anything like terrible, but I do think he deserves criticism. I absolutely. Cause like I mentioned, if it's any other job, we're getting kicked out on our ass onto the street. We don't, you're making hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars to go out there and kick footballs for a living. You can't ask for, of course there's a lot of pressure in that situation, but as a kicker, that's low-key a dream scenario right there. That's like if you're going up to win the game as a wide receiver and you're in a one-on-one jump ball in the end zone and it's just you in the corner and it's a perfect throw. Maybe not necessarily a perfect throw, but a good throw, a catchable ball. Let's just say that. That's your moment right there. That was Tyler Loop's moment. And hopefully he has more to kind of make up for that, but it stings right now in Baltimore. And for Pittsburgh, actually, before I get into Pittsburgh, I meant to mention this as well with Baltimore. A couple of things, actually. I've been talking a lot about them. 17 minutes in talking about them, but, it's just a hell of a situation. I was talking to some of my family yesterday about how I thought it could have kind of been a repeat situation in 2012 if Baltimore managed to sneak in. Like, hey, you look at the playoff bracket in 2012, they barely stuck in. They got the 4 seed. Like I mentioned, they barely stuck in with Joe Flacco. And meanwhile, it wasn't Houston, which I actually thought they did beat Houston in a wild card round back in 2012, but they ended up beating Indianapolis. Then they beat Denver with a mile-high miracle, which, again, if they win, Jacksonville, New England wins as well. They go on to play Denver. Hey, repeat of 2012. Then New England would play Jacksonville. This is just saying all the highest seed wins, or all the highest seeds win, which is kind of looking likely, to be honest with you. Let's say New England beats Jacksonville, which is a likely scenario, very realistic scenario. Baltimore goes on to beat Denver, which I think could absolutely happen. Baltimore would be traveling to New England in the AFC Championship. Guess what they did in 2012? Baltimore traveled to New England for the AFC Championship and ended up winning that game. Baltimore was kind of handily beating New England a few weeks ago, and then the whole 12-minute thing with the whole Derrick Henry situation, again, another John Harbaugh mishap. And they go on, and then they go on to win the Super Bowl, and San Francisco's on the other side as well, and they're an underdog. So I kind of thought it was interesting to kind of bring up that point with a kind of 2012 parallel a little bit there, to where like could have worked out to where they could have had another 2012 situation. And another thing I wanted to mention as well with the Ravens is one of my favorite hires going forward in the future for Baltimore, which I definitely think they're going to be looking for a new head coach. I think their dream scenario would be hiring Robert Saleh as a defensive head coach. Seeing what they have done, or seeing what he has done with that San Francisco defense, mind you, their main pass rushers like Cleveland Farrell and Keon White right now, guys like if they walked in the same room as you wouldn't even know them. Guys who were just playing in the UFL like a few months ago. And what that defense has done is nothing short of just incredible, to be honest with you. And I think that is someone who could legitimately build a culture around. Like, he can build a culture of some sort. Great defensive mind, young, energetic. Look, in New York, it didn't work, but who the hell works in New York in the first place? The only one I've ever known in my lifetime to work in New York is Rex Ryan, and he had a very short window of success there in New York. Aaron Glenn this year, I mean, it was not Robert Saleh's fault in New York, and I think he definitely deserves a second chance. I think people are going to be lining up out the door for that Baltimore job. So you're coming into Lamar, Derrick Henry, a well-run organization that does not fire coaches. I think it'll be a mutual parting ways with the Ravens and John Harbaugh. But I think hiring Saleh, getting a good offensive coordinator, I think that would put the Ravens in a seriously good spot for the future. A young, energetic guy who I think could really build a culture. And to me, that's my dream scenario for Baltimore. But for Pittsburgh, and I don't really have too much to talk about with Pittsburgh. I think it was just more of a Ravens kind of choking job. Look, they get DK Metcalf back this week against Houston, which I think is massive. I think if they would have went out there with what they've had the last couple of weeks against Cleveland and the Ravens last night with Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Adam Thielen, just really not necessarily the best receiving group in the world, and Arthur Smith refusing to run the ball consistently when the running game is actually pretty good. Jaylen Warren against the Browns last week, and I think they would have won against the Browns. He had like 12 carries for like 60, 70 yards or something like that. He was running all over them, and they just stopped running the ball. And I don't understand. He gets way too pass happy. And I know he's trying to get big plays down the field, but I think the Steelers are at their best when they're kind of pounding the ball down the field a little bit, not quite asking as much of Aaron Rodgers as they should be with him at 42 years old, and them going against Houston on Monday. So I think DK will be a great addition, but I think they just got to run the ball more. I think they would have won that game more handily last night if they just kept running it with Jaylen Warren and stopped giving Lamar the ball back so many times. I know it ended up working out, and Aaron Rodgers made some really good throws down the stretch, but they've got to fix their play calling. I think Arthur Smith should be canned after this year, too. I ain't trying to be that guy to where like, oh, well, I think so-and-so should be canned, this and that. Like, these guys are I'm not necessarily the most comfortable with saying guys should be fired, but if they're not necessarily doing the best at their job, and I think they're holding the team back, then I think they should be fired. And I know Pittsburgh's in the playoffs, but I think Arthur Smith's play calling actually this year, and I've seen a lot of Steelers fans say the same, has been below mediocre. I do not like his play calling. I think situationally he's not great. He doesn't run the ball enough. Asked way too much of Aaron Rodgers, a 42-year-old quarterback who's banged up in the first place. And I think it's a big bonus for them getting DK Metcalf back this week. TJ Watt, I think he had an interception last night as well. How clutch is it to have him back? He should be back to near full strength next week, which I say one of the biggest flaws with the Houston Texans is their offense. And I know their offense has gotten better throughout the last couple of weeks, but really throughout the last month and a half or so, their offense has gotten better. But I think against that Steelers defense, that Houston offense is going to struggle. They're not out there playing against Tennessee, some of the weaker teams in the league. That Houston defense or that Pittsburgh defense is also for real. Maybe not quite as good as Houston, but TJ Watt's looking to win his first playoff game. I mentioned to a friend yesterday, like, what's kind of crazy? That Myles Garrett, as much as we bash him for staying with the Browns and stuff, which I still don't think is necessarily the right decision. And again, congrats to him yesterday for breaking the all-time sack record. He has more playoff wins than TJ Watt. It's not crazy. TJ Watt's never won a playoff game. All the successful years there, as many times as he's made the playoffs, he's always had a winning record in Pittsburgh, never won a playoff game, but yet Myles Garrett has more playoff wins than TJ Watt. I think that's pretty interesting. But, the Ravens not getting in, Steelers barely sneaking in. And speaking of a team that's been barely stuck in the playoffs, the Carolina Panthers, a lot of people saying that the playoff seeding should be changed, especially with Carolina being able to sneak in. Like, oh, if Carolina gets in, it's just a bunch of bullshit. I have a lot of family down south that really likes the Carolina Panthers. Oh, of course, they all live near Charlotte or in Charlotte. I've always I've always liked the Panthers growing up. I have a close friend that really likes the Panthers as well. He was pretty excited. He's a Ravens fan and a Panthers fan. So, I've always kind of liked the Panthers. I'm not biased talking about any of these teams on here or anything like that. I leave the bias aside here on the podcast and really anywhere. I always just kind of like looking into every situation, and I think we all have teams we like more than others. But seeing Carolina in, I think it's really cool. And here's one thing as well. When people talk about Carolina, do they really deserve to be in the playoffs? We need to get these shitty teams out of the playoffs, yada, yada. If you win, you at least shouldn't have home field advantage, which I could agree with more than just saying like they should just be completely eliminated from the playoffs. Because if you're going to eliminate, let's say Carolina for winning their division, if you're going to eliminate that aspect of it to where, okay, they finished 8-9, Minnesota and Detroit finished 9-8, one of those teams get into the playoffs over Carolina, well, then you might as well just take out every division in football. You might as well just make it 16 teams in the AFC and the NFC and just rock with what is it, 8 teams or 7 teams get in the playoffs? You might as well just you might as well get rid of the NFC South, the NFC East, the AFC. Like, you might as well just get rid of divisions in general if you're going to do that. There's really no point. I've always personally loved having division winners. I've always thought it's been pretty interesting. And, Carolina, here's the one thing with that as well is like, yeah, Detroit and Minnesota had better records, but are they really that much better than Carolina? Yeah, maybe Detroit is. I think Minnesota's defense would give a lot of teams a bit of a hassle in the playoffs. But realistically, Detroit and Minnesota would be first-round exits. Like, if they had to go and play the Rams, we seen Detroit play against the Rams a few weeks ago. They got their ass kicked. Maybe not. Maybe they didn't necessarily get their ass kicked, but they lost. They lost the game pretty handily to Matt Stafford and the Rams. Minnesota, it's looking like they would have probably rolled out Max Brosmer this week if they did end up getting in. Which they were very close. They actually ended up finishing 9-8. JJ McCarthy can't seem to stay out there for more than like 2 quarters, God forbid. It's getting pretty ridiculous. I'm curious to see what Minnesota's going to do next year. I know they finished the season out strong, but I don't see how you can roll that back. I really don't. Talking about Aaron Rodgers too, maybe potentially staying next year. I think he'd have to weigh his options other than Pittsburgh. I think Minnesota would be incredibly interested. I'd bail ship and go to Minnesota in a heartbeat over the Pittsburgh Steelers. Especially with, you're throwing a Justin Jefferson, you're throwing an Addison, you got a hell of a defense if Brian Flores decides to stay, if no one hires him as a head coach, which I think teams are very weary, of course, on hiring him as a head coach. But Carolina, I just, like I said, with Detroit, I think they'd be a first-round exit. Look, Carolina beat the Rams. Carolina beat the Packers. Both teams are in the playoffs. Who the Lions lose to? The Packers and the Rams. Like Minnesota. They'd be rolling out Max Brosmer or maybe a beat-up J.J. McCarthy, who I don't trust quite as far as I can throw him, to be able to stay healthy, more or less play consistently in 60 minutes of a football game. So I don't see it to where it's to the point where, oh, God, Carolina just should never be in the playoffs. They stink. What are we going to put in, Detroit or Minnesota? Those are the only other 2 teams you put in above them. Of course you're not going to put in Dallas. What are you going to put in, Washington? I don't get it. Tampa had their chances plenty of times to be able to win that division. They started off, 6-2, 5-2, something like that. Ended up choking it away. So I don't necessarily agree with that Carolina shouldn't be in the playoffs. I think they've done their part. I think they've won a lot of games. I like saying division winners. I don't care whether or not they're 8-9. Look at how bad the NFC East was for years. Jesus, before Phillies had their mini dynasty here over the last couple of years, especially in the NFC East. And, the Cowboys being incredibly mediocre for some years. The Eagles being mediocre. And then there's just been a complete flip-flop there. They had that one year where I think, the Cowboys won it, or they were the Washington football team at the time back in 2020. They ended up getting in there with like 6 wins or something. And not quite many people were talking about it then. They were going against Tampa. And I remember Taylor Heineke, he was going against Tom Brady, and it was actually pretty competitive. And people were like, oh, it's a great story seeing this team get in there and this and that. And all of a sudden Carolina gets in. I was like, Jesus, how the NFL allows Carolina to even be in the playoffs is just egregious. I'm like, bro, relax. I think they're good enough to be able to maybe make some noise. Do I think they're going to beat LA on Sunday? Probably not. But I'd say the same for Minnesota and Detroit. I'd say all their chances would be around the same. Carolina already beat them previously. The Lions didn't. And quite frankly, the Lions didn't look good yesterday either. They barely scratched the surface to be a to be a 9-8, being over 500, and they almost choked it to the Chicago Bears. So, I could see the argument to where it's like, hey, maybe they shouldn't get home field advantage. I'd say maybe home field advantage should be ranked on, record more or less than seeding. I could understand that part. I'm kind of all in. Like, if you didn't want to give Carolina the home field advantage at 8-9 and them having the 4 seed over LA, it's whatever. I mean, but I do think this game this week with Carolina and LA is going to be interesting. LA is to fly across the country to Carolina, which they lost to about a month or so ago. And one thing with Carolina, it's kind of like the same as Tennessee. It's kind of one of those weird southern states that can get really cold. Like, not many of them do. You don't see Florida getting cold. You don't see Atlanta getting cold. Really, you don't see any of that. Like, it can get pretty frigid cold down there in Carolina, and it's pretty interesting down there. So I don't know what the weather's going to be like, but I think they play on Saturday, so I'm going to have to check the weather there in Charlotte. But if it's cold, you get Stafford and the Rams out there in LA who are used to beautiful warm weather year round, and in a controlled environment, they play in 70 to 80 degree weather every game they play in LA down there in SoFi. So it'll be interesting. I say the same for New England and the Chargers. Is like, LA has to go down there and play in New England, which is not SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles, to where it's beautiful 70, 80 degrees in January. I mean, the weather here in Maryland is bad enough, more or less up there in Massachusetts, to where it's like 10 degrees colder and snowing all the time. So those are harsh conditions. That's playoff football right there. So that's where I'm a little concerned with these two LA teams heading into Wild Card Weekend this weekend. So it'll be interesting to see there. But I do think Carolina deserves a playoff spot. I don't agree with, Carolina shouldn't be in. Again, I can understand the hearings of maybe they shouldn't have home field advantage. I'm in for that. I'd rather that than not necessarily have them in the playoffs at all. I think it gives it a some sort of an interesting dynamic, and I think they've done their part in terms of winning their division. That's the point of a division to me. Like, if you don't even want them in, then again, get rid of divisions altogether in football. So this morning, as of now, me recording this early this morning, only Raheem Morris and Kevin Stefanski and Pete Carroll actually just got fired a couple minutes before I hopped on here on the podcast. So, with Raheem Morris and the Falcons GM getting fired as well, they were, again, with Kevin Stefanski and Pete Carroll, they were all dead men walking in their organizations, to be completely honest with you. They just were. Raheem Morris, back-to-back, just kind of, I think they were 8-9 both years. I think they were 8-9 last year. They were 8-9 this year. Kind of had some, hot finishes to the season, slow starts. And, one of the things is with Raheem Morris, he's a defensive coach that does not coach defense well. And that's kind of one of the issues I've always had with Raheem Morris. Even in his he coached years ago as well, and he was not great. And I think one thing that's really going to haunt this Falcons organization for years is that Kirk Cousins contract. And that's where they go to fire their GM, which I completely agree. And yeah, Kirk Cousins, he played at the beginning of last year. Well, you give him all this money and then you draft Michael Penix. And it's not like you're drafting a young 21-year-old project QB. Like, let's say what the Seahawks did with Jalen Milroe. It's not like they went and, they drafted Jalen Milroe to sit behind Kirk Cousins for a couple of years. A guy who's clearly not ready to play in the NFL quite yet, but has all the attributes to be a star in the league. And that's who I'm curious about Jalen Milroe in the upcoming years as well. We sit behind Darnold, has a good support system around him. But you go on to draft an older quarterback with injury issues, someone who's kind of like, hey, he's ready to play now, who I thought was going to be a Las Vegas Raider. That's where everyone thought Michael Penix was going to go, was to Las Vegas last year. And no, he ends up going to sit behind an older quarterback in Kirk Cousins, which, again, if you have an older quarterback who suffered some injuries throughout the previous years, he had an ACL injury, having some insurance behind him is not a bad thing at all. I don't disagree. But I think drafting one that high, I think they drafted, Penix 8th overall, I think, or something like that. To me, it's like, why, if you knew you were going to draft a quarterback, why would you sign Kirk Cousins for hundreds of millions of dollars, and then you go and you just blow. And then he ends up getting benched by the middle of the season last season. And then he comes in this year, he ends up winning some games, but you look at the opponents he beat this year. I mean, besides LA last week, which they had, were, 21-0 at halftime or something like that. Kirk Cousins is washed. He is. You look at his arm, Kirk Cousins is beyond washed. He was washed last year. He looked good at the beginning of the year. Then he got midway through the year, and everything he's throwing is floating across the field. Big interceptions. I think it started off really with that game against the Chargers. I think he got benched after that game. Maybe it was against the Panthers. I forget which one it was. I'm pretty sure it was the game against the LA Chargers last year. He ended up getting benched after. He threw a couple of picks. He ended up losing the game. Just bad decision-making. I mean, the Falcons have been stuck in mediocrity forever. It's really since the Super Bowl. They've had a couple of really bad years since, but they've been drafting 11th overall. They drafted Pitts 4th overall a few years ago. They canned Matt Ryan. They ended up getting Penix at 8th. They've been drafting 8th, 10th, 11th, 12th. Again, where their record shows. They're finished 8-9 this year. They finished 8-9 last year. They finished right around that 7-win, 8-win. Right around that mark. It's just not quite good enough. And I think one thing that was really the end of the rope for Raheem Morris and what took them out of the playoff position for them this season was that loss against the New York Jets about a month ago. If they won that game, they'd be in the playoffs right now. We wouldn't even be talking about Carolina and we should change the seeding in the playoffs and home field advantage. We wouldn't even be talking about that right now because Atlanta would be in. They'd be 9-8. People are like, oh, well, they got a good squad. They ended up getting in. They finished over 500. That loss to the New York Jets and Aaron Glenn was it for Raheem Morris. He knew it. So you seen the look on his face. You've seen his conferences afterwards. He was his demeanor kind of shifted. He knew he was a dead man walking in Atlanta, and so did the GM as well. Now I'm firing them both. I think is a step in the right direction for the Atlanta Falcons. Again, I think Atlanta has really talented players. I think they are in need of a quarterback still. I don't know if Penix is the answer. He's incredibly injury prone. He's coming off an ACL tear. It's like the second or third one he's had in the last 4 or 5 years or something. He suffered a couple in college. He's suffered one here in his second year as a pro. That's something you have to take a look at as well. It's like, okay, Penix has been mediocre at best when he's played for us. I think Atlanta's got to go look at getting a quarterback this offseason as well. They're still paying Kirk. Kirk, of course, isn't their long-term answer. He's only going to get older. And Michael Penix is still very questionable in terms of their future at the quarterback position. So, I don't know. I think they need to go out and get themselves a real qualified GM that somehow turn this thing around, get out of some of these bad contracts, invest in Drake London, invest in Bijan. You can't afford to get rid of Drake London and Bijan Robinson. You drafted them really high. They're some of the best at their position. You could argue Bijan is a top 3 running back in the NFL. Drake London, when healthy, is a top 8 receiver in the NFL. His ability to go up there and grab a football. And he played at USC basketball for a year. He's like a damn small forward in the NBA. He's like 6'5", ridiculous wingspan. Hands just could reach across his entire computer screen I have in front of me right now. It's just ridiculous. And you can't afford to get rid of those players. And I think you have good players in Darnell Mooney. I do think they've made some good decisions. I think they might move off of Kyle Pitts this year, which I'd have a hard time paying Kyle Pitts a lot of money, especially after you're paying Kirk Cousins a shit ton of money. And, you got Bijan and Drake London here that are due for some money. Jesse Bates, you drafted 2. That Pierce they drafted in the first round this year has been really good. I thought that was I think they traded up for Pierce, and he worked out. He seemed to be really good. So, good for them. I think that's been a hit of a draft pick, but a lot of talks about the Falcons and them hiring an offensive head coach as well, which I think is the right decision to make. Just gonna get an offensive coach and hire a good defensive coordinator. Again, that's what they need. They need someone to figure out this offense, try to develop Michael Penix, get some sort of structure there on the offense. You have a lot of offensive talent, with no structure at all. Zach Robinson was clearly the wrong hire, which was a Raheem Morris hire. His staffing hasn't necessarily been great in terms of who he hires. So there's a lot of reasons Raheem Morris got fired. I didn't think there was any chance he'd end up keeping the job. I talked about it last week. And ended up coming to be this morning, or actually last night, not even this morning. Kevin Stefanski got fired this morning. And, Stefanski, again, a guy who just felt like a dead man walking as well. Some of it kind of felt like it was unfair. No one really knows whether or not he had anything to do with the Dylan Gabriel and the Shedeur Sanders thing. He just was thrown in a mess, and it's looking like he's going to get another head coaching job. He's a guy who is being talked about with the Raiders job potentially. It's not necessarily the strongest head coaching cycle. It's a pretty weak head coaching cycle this year. Not a lot of big time hires. Apparently, Matt Nagy's another one there. That's apparently one of the bigger hires coming into this cycle. Who, we remember his last couple of years with the Bears. I mean, even really his last couple of years here with the Chiefs. Chiefs fans have not liked him in terms of calling their offense. Apparently, he's had some issues with Pat Mahomes and the offense. So, I don't know if that's necessarily a strong hire there. The Browns, they have a lot of work to do in terms of heading back in the right direction. They have a defense that's built to win now, but their offense they have a lot of work to do on the O-line. Who knows what the hell they're doing at quarterback? You have Shedeur. You drafted Dylan Gabriel. You drafted Dylan Gabriel in the third round. And the thing is with Sanders is I think he won 3 out of his 5 starts, but he hasn't necessarily looked great. But one thing I do back Shedeur with as well is they stuck in Gabriel, they stuck in Flacco. They had a couple of quarterbacks come in there and start, but they were losing game after game after game. Every time you look up, you see Browns lose, and Shedeur Sanders comes in. Meanwhile, he may not be lighting the world on fire, but he's doing what it takes to win games. You look up, it's like a couple of interceptions, which aren't all necessarily his fault. Tip balls off the receiver's hands. Just growing pains. One of the things with Shedeur that I had a problem with him at Colorado with is him just running backwards like 20 yards and holding the ball in the one hand. He ended up fumbling it yesterday, doing the thing with the ball in one hand and just kind of keeps poking it out. And it's basically a free fumble for any defender that really gets a chance if Shedeur doesn't go and slide or doesn't notice him coming behind him in the pocket or whatever it is. I do think maybe they should give Shedeur a chance, a real offseason to develop. This offseason was a disaster for him. You had the Gabriel situation. Kevin Stefanski clearly didn't like him. You had the fan base who wanted him to start, but then it was Flacco. Then they had Pickett, Huntley, Deshaun Watson apparently wants to come back and play now. They can't dump him because they're paying him an assload of money. So the Browns are just a mess, and Stefanski, unfortunately, was just thrown into the fire. He had his first couple of years there, which were pretty successful. When he had a good quarterback in Baker Mayfield, they went on and they won a playoff game against Pittsburgh, who started 11-0 that season. They ended up finishing 12-4 in the 2020 season. What a weird year that was for Pittsburgh. Remember Juju doing all the TikTok dances on the logo and a bunch of crazy shit, and Chase Claypool. That could go down as one of the most hated teams in really NFL history, to be honest with you. What a weird year with that. But they ended up giving him a competent quarterback, ended up making it work. I know the whole Baker thing, that was apparently an organizational move. Of course it was. When's the last time you looked and the Browns really made a quality organizational move besides Myles Garrett? And even so, Myles Garrett broke the sack record this year. They could have gotten 2 or maybe 3 first-round picks for him, which in terms of an organization, you're not going to have Myles Garrett long enough. He's in his 30s now. That's a guy you're going to look in a couple of years from now and be like, damn, we could have gotten maybe 2 to 3 first-round picks for him. And you look up, if they do manage to actually build this thing up from what they have, in 3 years, they might be a decent team. But I don't trust the Browns doing that at all. You look up who is drafting in the top 5 to 6 picks every year you look up. Giants, Jets, Browns, Titans, Cardinals, Raiders. Look at them this year. Guess where all those teams are drafted at? Top 6, 7, 8. They're all. It's a mess every year. That's why everyone's like, oh, we're a couple of organizational moves away from really shifting this thing around. And it's like, Are we trusting the Browns ownership to all of a sudden in a season, put Shador in a good situation if they do decide to keep him? Or are we going to get our 18th quarterback in the last 3 years? I mean, think about what they came into this year. I just mentioned it a few minutes ago. They traded for Kenny Pickett. They ended up shipping him off to the Raiders. They ended up getting Tyler Huntley. They ended up with Deshaun Watson, who's still been injured. They've had him for years on the worst contract in NFL history, period. Another organizational move by the Browns. You ended up giving a shit ton of draft capital, and then you ended up signing him to the worst contract in NFL history. They have Joe Flacco, who they ended up shipping off to the Bengals midway through the season. And you draft Dylan Gabriel in the 3rd round, who most NFL executives were like, what are they doing? College people in college football, I watch all around are sitting there going like, yeah, Dylan Gabriel was fun. You kind of see him going around breaking some records in college football, but no one thought he was a real, NFL prospect. They thought maybe he'd be a 7th round QB, 7th round QB. Managed to make it work somewhere. Managed to be a backup. Take him with like the 98th overall pick. And then you end up taking Shador 2 rounds later. I do not understand. And Stefanski, unfortunately, again, thrown into that mix. But whoever the next head coach of the Cleveland Browns is, I'm sorry. I feel for you. And the same goes with the Raiders as well. That shit show they've had going on for years. The Browns and the Raiders get a lot of press, in terms of, they're this far away, especially when they had Derek Carr. They're like, they're this kind of player away from being real contenders. And they had a couple good years with Derek Carr, and they just fired Pete Carroll this morning. But with them getting Fernando Mendoza now with the number 1 overall pick, and supposedly, and Kevin Stefanski seems to be the main guy, they're eyeing on there in Las Vegas. I give Davis some credit. I give him a lot of credit. He takes a lot of big swings in Las Vegas, but they just do not work. Josh McDaniels was another one. One of those New England Patriots hirings from the Bill Belichick, from that Bill Belichick era there in New England, of course. A lot of people went on to go and try to hire those guys, and it just did not work. And one of the things with that is, it's not the same as hiring from the Sean McVay tree, the Andy Reid tree, the Shanahan tree. Like, it's not the same because those guys are known as being good teachers in terms of doing what they do and, teaching other coaches. What was it? The Indiana head coach said this with Nick Saban, who is not the same as Belichick. They may be friends, but you know what Nick Saban was known as? Being a hell of a leader and a hell of a teacher in terms of teaching the sport to the guys that are younger than me, coming out of high school, sophomores, seniors in college, looking to go to the NFL in an elite Alabama program. I couldn't get the word out of my mouth. It was kind of a tongue twister there. Elite Alabama program. He was seen as a mentor and a teacher, and the Indiana head coach said he learned more in his 1 year under Nick Saban than he did in his other 27 years of coaching. And those are the guys that say those things about McVay, Shanahan, Andy Reid, like those kind of coaching trees. Bill Walsh, those kind of guys. Bill Belichick is a different breed. He's kind of one of those guys who are like, I don't know, let's say he's the CEO of a major company or something like a Bezos, Elon Musk or something like that. Like, they ain't teaching, like, it's not the same being an assistant to Bill Belichick as it is Andy Reid, because it's like, yeah, I'm his assistant coach, but he kind of keeps all the power and everything for himself. He don't give a shit about me. Like, he's a guy who wants all the credit. He's someone who is kind of just very, very critical, which, criticism is necessary, but he doesn't necessarily want to teach the stuff he knows. He's just kind of give me all the power kind of guy. He did it with, GMing there in New England for his last couple of years. Like, it is who he is. It's not the same from the Bill Belichick tree. And that's where Mark Davis tried doing with, Josh McDaniels a few years ago, which the players were literally getting ready to quit because they just couldn't be around Josh McDaniels anymore. And it's not like Josh McDaniels isn't good at what he does. Look at what he's done with New England as an offensive coordinator. He is one of, if not the best offensive coordinator in the NFL. He is elite as an offensive coordinator. As a head coach, is a disaster. Comes from the Bill Belichick tree. And one thing that scares me with the Las Vegas Raiders, and Mark Davis loves taking big swings. He loves getting in the press, loves seeing it. Is Brian Flores from the Bill Belichick tree, who made Tua Tagovailoa cry, a bunch of crazy shit. Miami still has an open lawsuit against the NFL, for a bunch of reasons. I just that's a rough hire, and from the Bill Belichick tree, I love him as a defensive coordinator. He's fantastic at what I think he could be a great head coach, but I think in terms of the situation they're at with drafting Fernando Mendoza, seeing what happened with him and Tua there in Miami, kind of that stubborn Bill Belichick kind of like hard ass thing kind of going on. I don't think he's the best guy to hire for Fernando Mendoza. It is a major red flag. Again, I think Brian Flores would be better off like stepping into a Baltimore situation to where it's like, hey, we have an established situation. We just need a guy who can hold down the reins, be a leader. We know Brian Flores can coach a hell of a defense. If Brian Flores was coaching that Baltimore Ravens defense, that team be 12-5 and not be heading to Cancun tonight. It'd be a completely different story. But the Raiders are not in the same situation as the Baltimore Ravens. Like, this is completely different. I think Stefanski would be a better hire in terms of for potentially, grooming Fernando Mendoza, making him a better quarterback. He's not going to be Tom Brady his first year. We have seen guys in their first year come in and make differences, though. C.J. Stroud, Jane Daniels last year, like organizations that were really bad. Like Washington has been as bad as Las Vegas, as bad as Cleveland, like as bad as they've been for the last couple of, like 10, 15, 20 years or so. And, they were bad this year due to injury and stuff like that. But the Raiders, they need an offensive coach to really help Fernando Mendoza. Now, I think Kevin Stefanski for them is the obvious hire, but I think maybe they should try taking a look at some other positions, which I'm sure they're going to get interviews in there. But Mark Davis loves taking the big swing. He does, and he loves getting his team out there in the media. And I feel like Kevin Stefanski will be the Las Vegas Raiders head coach soon, very soon. Again, an offensive head coach who is in a weak head coaching cycle, who he gets a lot of press. Hell, he gave the Browns a lot of press for a team that loses all the damn time. Every time you look up, you see the Browns on a 7, 8, 9 game losing streak and just a carousel of just a disaster at quarterback. They're always being talked about. So, I think Mark Davis will be all in on that for the Raiders. And Pete Carroll, not the hiring anyone thought that would be. Looking into the Raiders, a lot of people kind of had them, including myself, as like maybe a dark horse playoff team heading into this year. Now, I think we maybe got kind of a little overinflated with the Pete Carroll hiring, them drafting Ashton Genty, trading for Geno Smith. Kind of seemed like it was the right moves going on there at Las Vegas. Like, they're kind of building a little bit of something. They're not going to be quite a 12-win team and be dominant and maybe have a chance of winning the AFC West, but maybe shake up things a little bit. Whether or not they sneak in, they'd go in and shake up some things. But no, I mean, I don't know if Pete Carroll will ever have another head coaching job again. And, he's kind of one of those coaches to where, he's kind of a looser guy, kind of just, fun to be around, older. Of course, he's the oldest head coach in the NFL, but I don't know if anyone's going to ever hire him again. I think he'll have a position in terms of maybe being some sort of role in an organization in terms of being some sort of manager or executive somewhere, who knows, but a consultant or whatever. But I think we see the last days of Pete Carroll coach and seeing what happened in Las Vegas to where they've already been bad the last couple of years, but to where they've regressed to being the worst team in the NFL by a country mile. They were just absolutely awful and a hard watch. And one thing I say with that as well is like teams like the Titans that are really bad over the last month, month and a half or so, they became pretty watchable, like kind of a feisty team. They didn't necessarily win a lot of games, but they were hanging around with the 49ers and some teams like that. Like, they became watchable. But for the first half of the season, they were just an unwatchable team. Horrendous. The Raiders were like that the entire year. And they regressed from even being just a bad team. They were just dog shit. It's pretty incomprehensible seeing how bad they got under Pete Carroll, to where I thought he'd give them some sort of stability of some sort. I think we all thought that, to where seeing where they ended off as. We knew Pete Carroll was going to be one and done 2 months ago, but kind of just sad to see the downfall of him there in Las Vegas. And last thing I want to talk about here today, just real quickly, is should we be kind of worried about the Rams heading into the Carolina game this week? And I kind of seeing where they've been at the last few weeks. They were down 21-0 to the Falcons last week at halftime. They ended up kind of having a bit of a second half surge, but the Rams seem to get off to really slow starts. And even McVay is looking up, and it's like, I see him looking up at the scoreboard when the Cardinals sucked the momentum out of the building yesterday in SoFi. They were up 20. Well, I think they were up like 23-20 with like 10 minutes or so to go in the fourth quarter, and the Rams ended up kind of running away with it in the last 10 minutes because the Cardinals aren't good at all. They're what they finished 3-14. I mean, just to think they started off 2-0 and ended up finishing 1-14 throughout the last 15 weeks is insane, and it's insane to think about. The Rams, they don't feel like the dominant force they quite were throughout the first half of the season. I'd say throughout the second half of the season, they've slowed down quite a bit. And yeah, they have Stafford, they have Puka. But one thing that their defense that people aren't quite talking about is like, oh, the Rams still have a really good defense. They kind of don't. Their defense since that Seattle game and even a couple weeks before that has kind of been just not very good. And one of the biggest detriments to the Los Angeles Rams' defense is their cornerbacks are short and skinny. Like Emmanuel Forbes is a skinny-ass dude. Like, that's kind of one of the things was talked about him coming into the draft, and that's what people were calling Washington insane, is like, how could you draft him over Christian Gonzalez? This guy is not very big. And you've seen what A.J. Brown did to the Rams at the beginning of the year. They're going against Teteroa McMillan and Xavier Legette, big, stocky, tall human beings, like just big human beings. And I think that's kind of a nightmare matchup for the Rams. Like, their defense, their pass rush hasn't been quite as effective over the last couple of weeks. And they get like midway through the game to the third, fourth quarter, and they just kind of piss out, to be honest with you. All of a sudden, it's like, Jesus. This Rams defense is just not great, and I think it's a bit of a concern heading into the playoffs here. And Devontae, we're going to have to check his injury status coming up here. That offense in the red zone is not the same as it is with Devontae Adams. I think, even though he's been out the last couple of weeks, he still may be the leader in touchdowns in the entirety of the NFL. That red zone threat he just brings with Puka next to him as well there's no other like it in the NFL. So we're going to have to check his injury status, but this game isn't as free against the Carolina Panthers as people like to make it seem like it is. Yeah, again, it's kind of a nightmare matchup for that defense. We've seen it against the Rams the first time with the Carolina Panthers. It's like big, stocky receivers against these kind of smaller corners on the Rams. They just kind of bully ball that defense. And as fast as they are, that Rams defense is, they're fast, they're young, they're electric. They get kind of bitched. Like they get bullied. Big time. So it's not a guaranteed game for the Rams to go in like, hey, we wanted to play against the NFC South. We wanted to play against the Panthers, the Bucks, whoever it is. I don't think it's a free game. Like, they are kind of concerning. They have not been the same team over the last 3 to 4 weeks, 4 to 5 weeks. They just don't feel like a dominant unit at all. Something's kind of missing there. And even though Stafford has been fantastic, most likely going to win MVP here in a few weeks, sometimes you feel like the Rams are kind of missing that mobile quarterback. And you look at their backups, Stetson Bennett, Jimmy Garoppolo. Like, if they had to stick in any of these guys, they're statues. And they're out there. I think I would definitely probably outrun most of those guys. I'm pretty sure I would. to be honest with you. Like, they're statue quarterbacks out there. So I think McVay, sometimes you kind of look, it's like that system, the when the pocket collapses, people forget Stafford is a statue QB. Kind of a bit of a outdated. It kind of just looks like a relic out there. Him, Jared Goff, like those guys are like, damn, when's the last time we seen a QB like that? The Bradys, the Mannings, like you don't really see that anymore. Those guys in the draft, like they're not really highly thought of because you want a guy who can move a bit. And sometimes you kind of look up and it's like the Rams, would they kind of prefer mobile quarterbacks sometimes? I mean, it depends on who it is. Like, you don't want a mobile quarterback who is sass and can't throw the ball, but so it's still something to think about. This is not a guaranteed game for the Rams. I think there is some calls for concern here heading into this week against Carolina. I think the mashup is not necessarily as easy as people kind of like to make it seem. So we'll see. I think it's going to be a great wild card weekend. And the end of the NFL season is here upon us, people. Very bittersweet, but as I mentioned earlier in the video, I appreciate you guys. Thank you guys so much for sticking with me here through the NFL season. We have a lot of great content here heading into the NFL drafts. Got mock drafts here for the channel, start ramping up here in a few weeks. Just very excited. The NBA playoffs is going to be great. I'm going to love talking about that. It's some of my favorite times of year as well, especially weather warming up. Just kind of the vibes going up everywhere, man. Yeah, summertime rolling around, vacations. Just for everybody, man. You know, it's going to be great. We're heading in to a bittersweet time of year where the season's ending, but we also got another section of this podcast we have not seen yet that I'm sure you guys will enjoy. So that is it for today's video, y'all. Hope you all enjoyed it. Again, if you have not already, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You know, any support means a lot here on the channel. And that's it for today, y'all. As usual, take it easy.